Welcome to the next podcast of Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and it's so wonderful to welcome you to this episode of Millinery.Info, where we welcome leaders from across the millinery industry into our ears and studios. I'm excited today to welcome Noel Stewart to the podcast. He's going to share about his career and how it's changed across his journey. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you very much to our Patreon podcast sponsors for their support of this series. Jennifer Hertz Millinery, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, Hatblocks Australia, Be Unique Millinery, Hat Academy, Hatters Millinery Suppliers, House for Dawn, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, Millinery Australia, The Hat Magazine, and Barcelona Hat Days. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes, which you can find on your podcast app or through the Millinery.Info website. Thank you so much, Noel, for joining me for this episode of Millinery.Info. It's wonderful to have you as part of our series.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Could we go back to the beginning of your millinery career? How did millinery come into your life?
Hats came into my life before millinery really did. I started making hats while I was at college I was doing decorative arts. So I was sort of doing lampshades, trays, shelves, those kind of things, and sort of decorative paint effects. Excuse me. And I started making headwear and things that were sort of on the body. But I didn't really know about millinery. I didn't know that there was a whole discipline. I was very green. Quite quickly, I sort of, because it just sort of struck a chord. It made sense, when you sort of found something that really works for you. And so I sort of pretty quickly explored. And after I graduated from my BA, I went and did some work experience. And the milliner I was working for also had only sort of been doing hats for sort of 2 or 3 years. And so they were learning at the same time. And they had some actual milliners employed who had trained properly various other places, Jess Collette and Besner. So I was learning at the same time as they were learning, which was quite interesting. But I was also learning about the fashion context. So that's when I started understanding that millinery was a specific discipline and the heritage of it. So that was in 1998.
Was there a moment where you're like, oh, I could have a career in this trade?
Yeah, well, there was, and it was sort of around that time. And also around that time, there were not a lot of hats. And also, the milliner I was working for, they sort of stopped doing hats. And I mean, Philip Tracy it was his sort of peak period. But apart from him, there was sort of, I'd go to Luton, which is the sort of center of the hat trade here, and it was really miserable, to be honest. There was sort of skips of blocks going off to be
Oh,
burnt or sold, factories closing down left, right, and center. And I'd done a sort of couple of courses at St. Martin's, and there was like me and maybe one other person doing the course, so it was at that time, it was a very sad state of affairs. And it's been sort of really, the millinery industry as it was not where it had sort of was going. But Philip and Stephen were sort of on the up, particularly Philip. So it was inspiring and there was some great work out there and it was very creative. But I was like, what the hell am I doing? I'm getting into this industry that's dying, basically. And that's kind of what it felt like at the time. And but I was like, well, it just makes sense to me. And I sort of felt it really worked. So I sort of, well, I don't really have a choice. So I carried on and worked for Stephen and I studied and I went back to the Royal College and I trained. So somewhere along the line, I must have made the commitment to do it. But I remember thinking, what am I doing? I'm a lunatic. But also it made complete sense at the same time.
yeah. Yeah. It didn't feel rational, but it was still the part.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And how was that training, having already studied a creative field, coming back to study with quite an intent for millinery?
For me, it was great. I really loved it. It gave me, it was training in ways that weren't sort of obvious as well. Like because I hadn't trained to be a fashion designer and I hadn't been around fashion students, that was really key for me and understanding that context and also having that time at a very advanced level. I knew how to make hats. So that I wasn't really learning how to make things. I was learning how to understand myself and develop my own language and how to design. and also work with designers, other designers. So for me, it was an absolute godsend. And also, the Royal College at that time was a fantastic place to learn. It was very rich in sort of culturally and creatively. So I loved it. It was the best time of my life. I just was really threw myself in. It was like I found my sort of calling, really. And I was working as well at the same time as where I could. And I was just making as much of most of it as I possibly could. Yeah.
During that time, was that when you were working with Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
And then when I left, I worked for Rachel Skinner for a bit, and I worked for Philip Somerville for a bit as well. And then I went back to Stevens. I've been around the houses.
It also gave you some great exposure to different ways of working, I guess, during that time as well.
Oh yeah, completely. And I think, although Philip Somerville wouldn't have been my natural choice at that time. Well, no, looking back, it made perfect sense. I learned, the first week, all I did was block. First 2 weeks, actually, all I did was block. And that sort of, you get a sort of really good muscle memory. And also they work very differently. They were like, oh, we've got the buyer from Harrods coming in tomorrow. Let's quickly get some things together. I was like, what? It's so crazy to
We've known
me.
about this before today, yes?
Yeah, and having been at Stevens, where it takes months and months and months to develop a collection, put it all together, and also it's a much more varied collection over sort of
Mm.
various different categories. So it was interesting to see it very focused on occasion wear, and the milliner there they were making hats for the Queen, they made hats for Princess Diana, so it was a very different setup. I really loved it, but yeah, it's very different to Stevens.
When did you decide that you're going to step out on your own?
I think I always knew it. I think it was always sort of the intention to do my own thing. I just think I can't remember which point. It must have been when I first started at Stevens before I went back to the Royal College. I was like,
Mm.
no, I want to do my thing. Yeah, I think nothing sort of focuses the mind like making other people's hats. And I loved it. And I was working in a few different departments, but I also knew that I wanted to do my own thing. And, they were very supportive, felt like the right context for me. And I was like, this is what I want, but I want it to be mine.
Did you have a vision for what you wanted that to be?
A vague idea. I wouldn't have necessarily called it a vision.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to make my own things. I wanted to I wanted to be collaborating with creatives. And I didn't necessarily know what that would look like. And I think it's a never-ending process of evolution and growth and understanding myself and where my strengths are. And I think, like I thought I wanted to do wholesale, and I did wholesale for a long time, it was for like 15 years. We don't do that anymore. And that's been a massive change, and it's made things a lot better for me. And I've moved into other directions, but that came like 5, 6 years ago. Like, no, actually, it was in 2016, 17 that I stopped doing
Yeah.
wholesale, and it just made made a lot more sense to me to not do that anymore. Not that we don't do it; we do it occasionally when the time is right, but I don't chase it in the way I chased it before. I come from a generation of designers where it was drummed into us at college and by the press that you had to do a collection every single season, and you had to show every single season, and if you didn't,
Mm.
you were sort of defunct and
Obsolete.
pointless. Yeah, and I think that was true for a long time. I don't think it's true anymore. And I think it's not that system doesn't work for everyone. It works fine for the massive companies, but I'm not a massive company. I'm a very small company. And I've sort of modified the business as it's gone along to suit me and what I'm good at. And
Yeah.
it makes a lot more sense for me now.
Yeah. What did those early days look like? Where were you working from and what were you making?
My mother's spare bedroom, and I had like three other jobs and evening jobs, and it was a lot of very hard work, and it was exciting, and it was exciting. It was also frustrating. There was no support really, and that's fine. I didn't really expect there to be. I was told very clearly at college. I got in tutors that had small businesses. I was very lucky. I was the only one on my year. A person on the other year and I could decide who we had as visiting tutors, but the person in the second
Yes.
year got to choose who they got, and then the person on the
Yeah.
first year would also get the benefit. So I got in milliners or young accessories designers that were sort of ahead of me, so that they could
Yes.
get the benefits. And they all like, you're not going to break even for at least 5 years, and it's going to be really hard work. And Stephen had told me the same thing. Like, so I knew that it was going to be really tough. It's not like it was unexpected. I mean, it took me a lot longer than 5 years to break even, if we're being completely honest. But it was fantastic as well. I got to work with some wonderful people and make some incredible things and have these brilliant moments. I mean, God, it seems such a long time ago now.
How many
Just
years
making
have you
a.
been in business for
I
yourself?
started in
Can we ask that number?
23. Yeah, I started in, well, I think my first collection was autumn winter 20, not 23, oh 03. Yeah. So it's over 20 years that I've been doing this. And I think my business isn't, it's not the same as when it started. And I think that's part of the fun, right? Like it sort of grows and
Yeah.
evolves and we do very different things as it goes along. Yeah, it's been amazing.
What were you creating? Were you doing fashion hats, racing hats? What was the?
Everything. I was working on the Stephen set the model, and Philip. I was doing a collection of ready to wear and couture. So
Yeah.
not huge, but and also special projects and commissions for private clients. But private clients for occasion, but also private clients for day wear. And I pretty early on, I knew that I didn't want to just do one kind of hat. I found it just as exciting to do a big sculptural piece that makes an image as to make a hat that someone loves and wears every day. Physically, they're very different, but in terms of the joy they bring to the person, that's also different. But they're both as valid and to me just as exciting. And also, I like the diversity and the difference, and I find it exciting to do all these different things. And also, I like challenges and like to discover and explore and develop things. And I always wanted to do something new. I wanted not to all the time. I think that's crazy, but like I like to find new things and develop new ways of doing things. So sort of innovation was sort of built in from the get-go as much as possible. And also I really believed in the power of hats and not just giant flamboyant things, also sort of wearable things and how they can really enhance our lives and make us feel good and protect us and express our personality.
That personal style element in the everyday wearing.
Yeah,
And when did you move out of mother's bedroom?
14 or 15 years ago. And we moved to Ridley Road. I think it was in my flat briefly, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was all a bit hazy. And then we moved to Ridley Road, which is a market street in Dalston, in a big block of very shabby studios. But I loved it, and I was there for 11 years. 11 years, 12 years, not quite sure. I'm a bit hazy on dates. And that was wonderful. It was very cheap, and I was surrounded by artists that allowed us to grow. And we did a lot of very big hats. We did all, yeah, from there. And then just after COVID, we moved to where we are now in Hoxton, which is great.
What is the space in Hoxton like?
It's much smaller than Ridley Road. We have two actually. We have one which is sort of for storage and for wet work, and then we have Atelier, the workroom, which is much smaller, too small. In fact, I'm trying to find a bigger one. And yeah, it's just lots of boxes, as most milliners are, lots of blocks and tables and machines, and my computer.
Do you have a showroom space within that?
No, no. I have no need for a showroom, like when clients come now, I used to be really, in Ridley Road, we had a sort of separate space at the front, which was more like a showroom where the collection would be on display. And we don't have that anymore. And I don't really miss it. And I think it's a sort of, I used to sort of keep the workroom very separate because our clients are a lot less than they were. And we don't have wholesale clients anymore. It's the private clients that do come, they quite like to see the workroom and be in the workroom. And it sort of feels like you're sort of getting to see something quite private. And like actually my kind of client, they do quite like to know what's going on and see the work behind it a bit. So, and it seems to work.
What style of hats are you making now? You mentioned it's been quite an evolution. How would you describe what's happening at the moment?
Month to month is completely different. I'm not going to lie. Like uh, suddenly, as of last week, we're now making straw hats, all kinds of straw hats. We're working on various different costume projects, but we're also working on a personal project of my own, which is going to be interesting. And we're also working on a project for a designer that's quite long ongoing, which is unusual. It really evolves and goes all over the
Yeah.
place. I'm very much like I can't remember who. I think probably Stephen is like, "What's your favorite hat?" And he was like, "The next one, the one that hasn't started yet." And I'm very much once it's in the box and it's gone, and I've got confirmation that they're happy. Uh, uh, then I've moved
Next.
on. Yeah. We have sort of performance and costume jobs as well now, which was sort of I didn't expect to be quite such a big part of the business, and now it is.
Yeah.
And that's great because that's very varied. The turnarounds are ridiculous, but that's how it goes.
What does your team look like at the moment?
So at the moment, I have Rosanna, who's been with me for 14 years, and I have Anna, who has been with me about a year and a half. And we've got Buzz, who's an intern from St. Martin's, and we've got Dan, who's there a couple of days a week as well. We have other people that sort of come in occasionally for specific things, but that's kind of it. It's quite small.
But also, in some sense, it's quite a big team as well, it sounds like.
Most days there's four of us.
Yeah.
And Buzz isn't permanent. Buzz is here till July, and then we'll go back down
Yeah.
to three. We've been quite structured. We start at 9 and we finish at 5. We very rarely do we work late. Very rarely do we work at weekends. I mean, I'm always working. I'm always on email. I'm always like
Yeah.
responding to those kind of things. But in terms of being in the studio, we're quite structured about it. Both Anna and Rosie have other lives, believe it or not, and
How
that
do
sort of
they?
works. I know that works quite well, and so it
Mm.
means that when we're there, we're quite efficient, and yeah, that seems to work quite well. But also, it's a small space, so we've got to be quite sharp.
Does that also help you plan your capacity, like what projects you can take on or what's coming up?
I've got better at that. I used to say yes to absolutely everything. I can't do that anymore, and in a sense, it's a relief. I mean, I don't love saying no. Obviously, business, yeah, particularly if it's a project I'd like to do, but it's also that's how it goes. Growing is it's part of growing.
You've created some very iconic hats for photo shoots and celebrity looks. Is that been something that's been a really conscious effort in your business, or it's something that's just evolved with the
The
style of
photo
the hats you
shoots.
create? Yeah.
I don't create hats thinking that they're for a photo shoot. That's not the intention. It's one of the outcomes when creating, if it's my own work. And I suppose it's the same if it's working for a designer as well. Like that's one of the outcomes. I think for me, it's like it's got to have its own integrity, the piece, and it's got to work with the body, a person, a character, a performance as part of a story being told. The stories in photo shoots, I'm never really party to that, or rarely am I party to that.
Yeah.
So occasionally we're commissioned specifically to do work for photo shoots, and it's like this is the mood we're trying. Actually, we had something last week that was along these lines, but it's still got to be me. It's still got to make sense in terms of my work, and also it's got to make sense in itself. I For photo shoots, it's not about costume in the sense it's not a character in the way that it's a performance of a role, but it's sides of a similar coin, like it's quite sort of hard to clearly define.
Fine line.
Yeah, and I think because we do a lot more costume work than we did, the make also defines to a large extent what's costume and what's fashion. When it's made for costume, it has to be made in a different way. It's got to perform very differently physically. When it's made for fashion, for a person to wear, it's got to be made for the customer's wearing experience, as opposed to the longevity and endurance that a costume thing has to go through. It's they're slightly different disciplines, but in terms of the outcome, they do blur a little.
Yeah. The costume work, has that been something again that you pursued, or it just has naturally fallen because you have a working studio?
I didn't pursue it. I at all. Like it just sort of happened. And I picked it up with relish because
Yeah.
it's in some aspects, it's just another form of collaboration and it's another form of expression and example of the joy and power of hats. And it's just as, it has just, can be. just as valid and as exciting to see a hat on a big screen as it can be to see a woman walking down the street wearing my hat, or to wear one myself. Like these are all exciting. So yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to wanting to be about the new and finding new experiences and new
Next.
ways to utilize my skills and talents. And I love
Yeah,
costume. Like I think much more than I thought it would. Don't get me wrong, some of it can be extremely dull and repetitive, but then so can some of fashion. It's part of and sometimes
absolutely.
that's quite a relief.
Have they been for film or theatre? Because sometimes the construction there can even differ between the two.
Totally. And actually for film, it's much more like fashion in the sense that particularly for principals, it's you'll be making doubles, but it'll enhance the actor's character development. So they've got to, if
Yeah.
making it for, I don't know, Penelope Cruz to wear on the Orient Express. It's going to help her feel in that character, which is not dissimilar to a woman putting on a hat to go to her son's wedding, but helps her feel the part in inverted commas.
Well, have you been making for theatre and film, and how has that
Oh yeah. Well, film,
been?
theatre, TV, and stage, and
Mm,
like performance, like
yeah,
Kylie's tour, which we just did, and each one has its own specific requirements. Theatre is by far the most rigorous and tough because of the amount of
restriction.
wear. Yeah, because it's like every night for 6 nights a week for months and months and months and months, and closely followed by performance like tour stuff.
Yes.
But then TV and film, it's very different. It's a few days.
Are there any shows or of those kind of creative projects that really stand out to you as like a really interesting project, or ones that fall a bit closer to your heart than others?
I mean, it's funny, like The Murder on the Orient Express was the first film I worked on. It was the first real costume job that I'd got. So that was such a steep learning curve. And my first time doing a fitting for costume was with Daisy Ridley, who was just come off Star Wars, which I'm a massive fan of. And then I was meeting Michelle Pfeiffer, who I was a massive fan of. But then pretty quickly followed by working on Cabaret, which I'm a massive fan of, in this theatre. And I'd never worked on theatre before. And I had a massive fan of the costume designer that I was working with, and sort of learning those collaborative processes and what the difference is between fashion and what the outcomes are different and what the requirements are different. Like both of those two learning experiences were very rich and I mean, a real thrill. And yeah, I would say were career highs. And then we made Paddington's hat, which was kind of wild because,
Yeah, very iconic.
yeah, very iconic. I mean, it's kind of weird because the hat is such an iconic hat, but it's also made from a digital program. So we had
Yes.
to, it's strange, it's unusual.
Another very big learning curve, I imagine.
Weirdly, that sort of was quite straightforward. It was just more
Oh,
the sort of we're making an iconic hat from a digital that's not going to be in real life, but it then is going to be in real life. And yeah, just strange.
what a weird experience.
Yeah, but I mean, we're used to it now. Everything's sort of got its own sort of weird personality.
And in terms of the workroom and how your team flows, how does that dynamic work? How do you guys communicate designs between yourselves?
Generally, like I will, it depends what it is. Sometimes it really
Of
varies. I
course.
mean, different people have different. Anna will have a set of projects that she's working on, and Rosa will have a set of projects that she's working on, but which I oversee the whole thing. And how we develop them and realize them can vary from project to project. But it always starts with a discussion and an exploration and sampling, and then sort of so discussion and exploring how things are going to could work out, finding out how they're physically going to work out, and then the realization. And sometimes that's had to be done at high breakneck speed, and sometimes we have more time to develop it. And also, it depends what else is going on. We're sort of
Yeah.
juggling.
Do you make hats mascot? Because I quite
Yeah, yeah, we do.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not much, and
yeah,
it's not a I don't seek that work anymore. It's not because I don't love that kind of hat. I do, but it's a very specific clientele that
yes.
needs a lot of investment into secure and maintain. And I did it for a long time, but it's a very, very saturated market. And I also recognize it's not like I'm not passionate about Ascot in itself or racing in itself. Or we just had a client come in who we've made stuff, we've been making something for, and I love what we're doing for her. Absolutely love it. There's something sort of really pure about it being for a celebratory moment, as opposed to a character or it's a very different thing to costume hat or a runway hat or a moment of the designer's expression. It's got to work in the client's look. For me, it's always that like I always want the client to sort of feel comfortable and thrilled to be in it at the same time, which is kind of an unusual combination because comfort in theory is like I think can feel a bit sort of relaxed, whereas which is true, but I also want them to feel elevated in themselves and excited and ready to enjoy themselves. A sort of fine balance. And I really enjoy that because that's completely unique. And it's similar to sort of we do quite a bit of bridal work. So it's just a sort of similar moment, but there's less pressure on an Ascot moment than I think I'm very careful to when someone comes, I think depending on their level of experience of hat wearing, um, they if they know what they want, it's quite straightforward, and my job is to facilitate that, but also find put them a little suggest things that they might not have tried before or not got somewhere else. But if someone hasn't got that much experience having wearing hat wearing, then it's like to introduce them to the joy of hat wearing as best as possible, and give them as many options as appropriate, and walk them through because to me it's like finding the right hat. It should be playful. It should be exploration and play and a joyous sort of expression of discovering themselves. Um, so I'm there to sort of support that and make them feel comfortable and confident in that moment, and that's a wonderful thing to be part of. And it's very
Absolutely.
close with if I'm working with uh, a designer or another professional to realize a professional thing, there is an element of that joy, but it's not about that person. It's about the result. So it's very nice to work with an actual person and see the joy on their face. It's like, oh, this is them find themselves in a new aspect. That's wonderful.
Very exciting process to be part of.
Mm.
Do you work on the designer collaborations? Are there any long-standing ones that you're taking part in now?
We're still working with Balenciaga Couture, which is great. I love it. For me, it's like the dream job. I mean, they're going through a bit of a state of flux. The new creative director got announced yesterday, and Demna's off to Gucci, and that's wonderful. There's something about working with a house that is unlike anything else, and I feel very fortunate to be part of it. The only one at the moment.
Yep. How did
Yeah.
that partnership begin?
They found me. They were looking for a milliner to work with, and they knew that they needed millinery to be a part of the couture offering. And so they interviewed me, and I got the job. Yeah, it's
Perfect.
amazing.
What does that look like throughout the year for you working as their milliner?
Well, I wouldn't say I am their milliner,
Oh, sorry,
but
yes.
maybe, or would I? I don't know. Currently, I am the milliner that they're working with. It really varies because each season is different. They currently they show couture once a year, and it's in July. And we work on a variety of different projects for them, and we do stuff. They have a store, a couture store where they sell the couture on Avenue Georges V. So we do development. They really believe in development. They really believe in innovation. It's very much the DNA of the house. They will have an idea. Devna will have an idea and they'll want to explore it, and they will commission me to explore it in some way, shape, or form. So they don't look at me as just about sort of headwear necessarily. We do garment development as well. And so we can do all kinds of different things. And we just did we made a bow for the store, which we did some new development for, and we replenished there. We've been making some hats and we made some masks. We're doing some stuff for private orders through them. And then, yeah, as the season goes on, we develop and we launch three projects and end up with one. We might like last year we did there was no we start I think we started with some hats and then they got stopped and then they got picked up again 2 months before the show, and we suddenly had to do all this massive amount of work. And it's a very varied experience, and there's no
Mm.
one way that it works. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's a relationship.
many pieces that go into forming a business for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's another project. But because the relationship is ongoing, it has a different. I mean, actually, having said that, like the majority of designers we work with, whether they're costume or fashion, I'm lucky now that I have good relationships that they keep on coming back. And so a lot of the initial work is of getting to know each other, understanding each other's system, working out what's best and how to work, and understanding each other is sort of out of the way.
Yeah.
Touch wood. There's always learning, of course there is, but
Yes.
the longer relationship goes on, the less setup work has to be done.
The rapport's developed.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And not so much luck, but a lot of hard work and skill, I think, too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, but that's the point, right? That's the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And also part of your business development. Were you conscious about heading into business all those years ago about business skills and actively building those, or how have you approached that side of
Yes,
it?
I'm not a natural businessman at all. I did a business course when I set up the business, and I think that was helpful. My father was a small businessman, and he was supportive as well, with lots of advice. But to be honest, it's always learning on the job and making the mistakes. And I learned a lot from the other people I work for and seeing how their businesses run. If I could hand the entire business running over to someone else, would I? Possibly. But then I'd slightly lose the joy of running my own business, I suppose.
It's that back to that crux of like you want your desire for it to be yours and your vision,
Yeah,
but it was
well, I mean, it's funny. I don't really look at it as like I want it to be mine and my vision because I sort of think
yeah,
that I I don't feel that as keenly as I used to when I was young. And I think letting go of doing the wholesale and having to put a collection out on this sort of regular
mm,
basis was a huge weight off my shoulders. And now I love working with other people. I love making my own work and I love putting it out there. I don't feel the need to shout it from the rooftops in the way I used to. I now
yeah,
enjoy the doing it in my way that suits me better. And it's not just me, like it's Rosie's been with me for 14 years. It's just as much hers to a certain extent. Yeah, and because the vast majority of what we do is collaborative now, and
mm,
it's me working with someone else, us working with someone else. So, and I love that. I love that balance as well. Like, I think that's part of the joy, big part of the joy.
could you give us an insight into what the wholesale or wholesaling experience was like?
Back then,
Yeah, so you said it's been a number of it was a little while ago, but
yeah,
it
it's
would be
like
interesting to hear how you
2017.
found it and that
I found it
and
really brutal. Like, I mean, I think I was doing trade shows, showrooms, building a collection over months and months, working with different factories, different manufacturers, different suppliers, getting a collection together. And I loved the sort of collection realizing, like building this sort of body of new work. It was always under a sort of intense time frame and financial restrictions. And then wholesaling it, like taking it to a trade show and then getting stores. I found it very hard to get stores to come. I was very lucky that I picked up a couple of good stores very early on. Barney's, RAP, were enormously supportive and kept me going for really like 9 years. I was stocked there and I'd sell out every
wow,
season.
yeah,
And I really loved that. And that was wonderful. And it was a very, their client is very conservative, but they were very discerning. So that was wonderful, but it was also it wasn't enough. Like it's
yeah,
never enough, and also sort of fashion is very much new and growth,
yeah,
and it's for a small business. Without you need money, you need a lot of money to build. And I was working other jobs, and then going to I was taking days off teaching jobs to go and sit on a stand and hope that
yeah,
people would come and buy the hats.
bye.
It is brutal. And you're in a very competitive market. It's, I don't know where it's at now. I don't do it. So
It'll be
it's
different.
not a
Yeah,
problem for
yeah.
me. Um, and
Left
it's,
that behind you.
well, to a certain extent. And, like,
Mm,
I think if I was to go back, I'd want to do it in that way. It would be
yeah,
very different, but
different.
there's not
Yeah.
much incentive.
Mm. Were you getting it produced by external manufacturers? How are you managing the scale of production you needed?
It depends what it was. Like, so I mean, I had machinists for the soft hats. I have a factory. I work in Luton. We still work together, but it was always coming through the studio. Like I was not like
Mm.
anything was ever fully outsourced ever.
Yes,
We did production
absolutely.
for Valentino for one season. That was but even that, I mean, that was like over 500 hats, which
Yeah,
is probably the biggest production run we've done. That was we it all came through us. We cut it and they blocked it, and then it came back and it was trimmed through us. And then we just did Saint Laurent. We did production for them, and the only was anything outsourced? No, nothing was outsourced. We handmade the whole thing in the studio, and
Wow.
there was a lot of machining, but the machining was done in the
Yes.
studio. So yeah, it depends what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's also varied and it's got
Yeah,
to be responsive to what the project is.
totally.
Coming to the current day, what's coming up that you're looking forward to working on?
Well, I'm
What's
doing
next?
this. Yeah, so there's a few things that are coming up. We've got straight after this, I have to go and have a meeting with a production company based in Amsterdam, well, between Amsterdam and Paris, and we are doing a purely for play exploration project, which is I don't want to say too much about it because it's sort of new. It's
Yes.
new for me, it's new for them. And we're making some things which will be headwear-ish. And that's been really wonderful because they've
Adjacent.
come to me and said, we want to develop some content with you because they want to slightly shift up their market into sort of more fashion context. So they've offered me an opportunity to do something purely for me. So that's good. We're working on 2 TV shows and a film. They're in the very early stages. Well, one of them is. Well, no, one of them sort of we're going to actually start cracking on with making those today because they've got to be delivered pretty soon. We are working on the Balenciaga show in July. I've got a meeting about that this afternoon. What else have we got?
Big
We've got
mix
sort
of
of other
things.
little private client things going on as well. Yeah, that's it currently.
Very,
Oh,
very
Fiddler on the
exciting.
Roof. We just delivered Fiddler on the Roof, and that's going to the Barbican.
Very exciting.
Can't remember when that opens, but pretty soon.
Do you get to go see it on stage?
I hope so. I haven't asked about that. I think they're just going into tech like this week. So I need to find out about that. Yeah.
It's very exciting to hear what you've been up to. It's been so exciting to hear about your story, and we'll watch for the evolution of what's coming next in your varied mix of projects. Thank you so much for your time, Noel. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I hope I haven't rambled too much.
No, it's all good. It's all interesting to me.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode with Noel. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you very much to our Patreon podcast sponsors for their support of this series. Jennifer Hertz Millinery, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, Hatlocks Australia, Be Unique Millinery, Hat Academy, Hatters Millinery Supplies, House for Dawn, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, Millinery Australia, The Hat Magazine, and Barcelona Hat Days. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes, which you can find on your podcast app or through the Millinery.Info website. Thank you so much for listening today. If you've been enjoying this series, please head across to our Patreon page and find out how you could support this series through becoming a Patreon supporter.